You know, since I started Gemini Does Games, I have reviewed, let's played, or streamed insert number here of games. That's a lot of games. And you know something? I think I deserve a break. So today, I don't plan on doing a damn thing. I plan on taking it easy, having a pipe, and relaxing. Maybe I'll rewatch Babylon 5. The first 4 seasons, that is. Not the 5th season. That can go stick its head in a pig. Or maybe I'll listen to some music or catch up on some reading. There's an idea. Let me see what I got. Nah. I don't remember having this one in my collection. Nani? What the hell happened? Where am I? Great. Well, guess I better go find something to review. On a cold Christmas Eve day over on my gameplay channel, I wrapped up a playthrough of the entire main Myst series, and I had an absolute blast as I played through 4 excellent games. Now, Myst has of course left quite the legacy since it first linked onto computer screens lo these many years ago and has had many a copycat in its wake. So today we're going to take a look at some of them and see just how well they capture the Myst spirit. We're off to an abandoned research facility to learn a thing or two about science in Odyssey. Then we'll be transported to a realm frozen in time in Quern, Undying Thoughts. Finally, we'll be marooned in a mysterious land, which also happens to be the title of the first game of a series called Rhem. That and more coming up later. Demo Bazwa! Kore desu. Yep, you read that opening infographic correctly. At least I hope you read it. I worked hard on those. For the first time in the channel's history, we are looking at a mobile exclusive game, and one that isn't just a Match 3 clone or a Clash of Clans knockoff. Yes, such a thing exists. This is Xon, or more accurately, the Xon Series, consisting of 4 games, each of which are about an hour long, if that. Hence why I decided to look at all 4 for this video. And in terms of the look, the feel, the mechanics, they're about as close as you can get to playing Myst or Riven on a mobile device. Without actually playing Myst or Riven on a mobile device, which you can also do, but we're not talking about them. It's kind of hard to talk that much about the story of the Xon games because the Xon games don't talk that much about the story of the Xon games. In the first episode, you're just thrown into the action with no kind of prologue or explanation whatsoever, and you're given some vague, and I mean vague, hints of story in the latter episodes, but that's about it. I mean, as shitty as Revelation was, at least in that game I understood what the hell was going on. But what these games might lack in anything resembling a coherent story, they more than make up for in the looks department. These are easily some of the better looking 3D games I've seen on mobile devices. Sure, the graphics are a little simplistic, but they're enough to get the job done, and they do so splendidly. The interface is very accommodating as well. In all 4 games, you have a choice of 2 playstyles, arrows and thumbsticks. With arrows, you've got 3 movement arrows on the left side of the screen. The top one moves you forward, the middle one does the same but a bit slower, and the bottom one moves you backward, while moving your finger around the rest of the screen looks around. I prefer the thumbstick style myself, wherein you move your character by moving your left thumb on the left half of the screen, and look around with your right thumb on the right half. In both playstyles, you interact with things by simply tapping them when they get in range, indicated by a hand icon. But now we come to the puzzles, and it's here where things start to fall flat on their face. For one thing, there seemed to be an over-reliance on mazes, particularly in Episode 2. Plus, with no real story to provide any sort of explanation, the puzzles didn't really have any rhyme or reason to them and felt like puzzles for puzzles' sake, which is fine. If I'm playing Bejeweled, if you're gonna drop me off in the middle of some desolate alien world, at least give me some reason as to why I should go around fiddling with everything. Adding to the confusion are these orange crystals which you can pick up throughout episodes 3 and 4. What did they do? Couldn't tell you. Never got them all, never had any inclination to. The closest I could get to an answer is this door with an orange crystal emblazoned upon it in episode 4, which presumably opens once you've gotten them all. But I don't know if it's just for episode 4 or if it somehow uses your phone's data to track the crystals from episode 3 or what's going on. Even the official walkthroughs for both episodes, the walkthroughs made by the game's developers, do little more than go, yep, those are a thing, and give no indication whatsoever as to what happens when you collect them all. So the Xon games may not be the most detailed in terms of story, graphics, or gameplay, but with the first game being free and the others being $2 a pop, you could certainly do a hell of a lot worse. So here we have an educational approach to the Myst-like formula. Odyssey, the game which can't seem to make up its mind which subtitle it wants to go with. Now, I was initially hesitant to cover this game because of its emphasis on education, because I didn't feel like I was qualified to comment on its effectiveness in that regard. But eventually I decided that Odyssey was still a game, so at the very least I could comment on the gameplay, and the gameplay is not that great. In Odyssey, you play an
ageless, faceless, gender-neutral, culturally ambiguous adventure person. Afghan cop, for short.
Who, as the game opens, is boating past some islands when you receive a recorded distress call from a quite verbose teenage girl named Kai. She, along with her brother and their researcher parents, have barricaded themselves deep within the islands to protect themselves from pirates and are now awaiting rescue. Deciding you've got some time to kill, you head towards the dock and begin exploring. Or at least you would if the door weren't locked. But not to worry, for attached to that door is a bit of Kai's journal, which she tore up and scattered throughout the island, and here's where the gist of both the game mechanics and the educational aspect come into play. For you see, being the caring parents that they are, Kai's mom and dad didn't want this little sojourn into an abandoned pirate-infested archipelago to deprive young Kai of her education. So, dear old dad took it upon himself to tell Kai all about the evolution of scientific principles, from the days of Aristotle through to the era of Isaac Newton and beyond, and Kai noted it all down in her journal. And I mean noted it all down. Look at all this! I told you she was verbose. Now, to be fair, the journal can make for some interesting reading about the history of our understanding of science, and the puzzles in the game take the form of scientific models and experiments Kai and her brother built. So Odyssey has the educational aspect down pat and is at least approachable to younger players. Again, in my opinion, I'm no expert in the field. So if you're an older player, you figure, well, I'll just skip the journal and just concentrate on the puzzles, right? Nope. As it happens, those puzzles are more than just models for learning about science. They also block access to the rest of the islands, and the reason Kai has shredded her journal to bits for you to find is that certain phrases and paragraphs in the journal have been highlighted, and these are the keys to solving the puzzles. Now, it would be one thing if the highlighted phrases merely hinted you in the general direction of the solution and left you to do most of the mental legwork, but they basically just give you the solution outright. And here's another thing. Some of the journal sections alone feel like they're longer than a full journal in a Myst game. And at last count, I'd gathered well over 100 pages and I hadn't even gotten to the end of the game.
Now, you could technically brute force your way through most of these puzzles, but for one thing, it would take way too damn long, and for another, it sort of defeats the game's educational purpose. So eventually it just got to the point where I was skipping through most of the journal just to get to the bits that told me how to solve a puzzle, and from the various reviews I've seen, I'm not the only one. Now, I don't mind reading a journal every now and again to get a bit of lore and backstory from the game. I don't even mind a journal providing an occasional hint to a puzzle. But for a journal to be required reading for every single puzzle in the game, for me, ruins the flow and just makes it nothing more than a glorified walking simulator.
For some technical notes, some of the puzzles, even putting the journal aside, rely heavily on colors, and with no option for a colorblind mode, this puts colorblind people at a severe disadvantage. Also, weirdly, when playing in windowed mode, the game's resolution defaults to 1600 by 900, even if you switch it to another setting.
Odyssey showed potential in its premise of being a Myst clone with an educational twist, but the execution is flawed, and unless some changes are made to the pacing and the way the journal was handled, I don't think it's worth it as it is now. So normally on this show, I look at 4 games that fit the theme of the episode. But of course, the theme for this episode is Myst-likes. And if you're a fan of the Myst series like me, then you probably know that a major element of the lore of the Myst series is the number 5. So I thought it would be a major missed opportunity if I didn't stick to the theme and look at 5 games. So, coming up in just a bit, you get an extra game.
Keep up with Gemini Does Games on social media, on Twitter at Gemini Does Games, or on the channel's Discord server. If live streams are more your cup of tea, then check out my Twitch page, twitch.tv/Gemini Does Games. And if you really like what I do and want to help support the channel, you could always chip in $1 or $2 a month at my Patreon page, patreon.com/Gemini Does Games. Arigatou gozaimasu.
This is Katif, the Kunchi experiment. Or Katif the Kunzi experiment. Take your pick. No one in this game seems to know how to pronounce anything.
We're approaching planet Katif.
There's a link to your mission on Katif.
You will know what the Kunchi is.
Try to learn what this Kunzi might be.
Katif is a sort of sequel, sort of not, to a game called ASA, which appropriately enough stands for a space adventure. Both games look very interesting in their own right, and for a while I wasn't sure which one I wanted to cover. The ultimate deciding factor? Katif has a free demo. ASA doesn't.
Man is able to understand concrete ideas that totally exceed his cerebral abilities.
Have you met mankind lately?
Moving on from the somewhat inspirational quote of rather dubious veracity, Katif starts out pretty promisingly with a very well animated, nearly 10-minute long intro cutscene, which ends up with you being teleported to Taita, one of the 216 moons of the eponymous planet. Once the cutscene ends and you gain control, the first thing you'll notice is the graphics, which are, again, very well done. They're not quite as photorealistic looking as, say, Riven or Exile. You can still tell they're CGI, but more often than not, only if you look really close. It's nowhere near as artificial looking as the original Myst. Adding to the immersion is something the developer really didn't need to do, but I think it's a fantastic touch nonetheless, and that's a very subtle wobble to the camera, simulating a natural head bob. But before you can gawk in amazement at the graphics, you must stare in contemplation at the difficulty options. Here in this menu, you can choose Story Mode, which is the same as Normal Mode, which is identical to Hard Mode.
Hardly seems worth the effort of picking, does it?
Yes, I know there's variations between the difficulties, it's just an odd bit of phrasing. Not the last example of that in this game by a long shot either. There's also Classic Mode, which is presumably even harder than Hard Mode. Anyway, once you choose a difficulty, you're stuck with it for your entire game, so that you're certain of your skills. I'm kind of torn as to how I feel about the story. There seem to be some genuinely interesting plot points and bits of lore from what I can tell, in the form of both dialogue and flavor text, but the sometimes laughable English translations and the barely above mediocre voice acting eventually got to the point where I just lost interest. The world of Taita, as well as how you move in it, has a nice bit of variety. Some of the backgrounds are simply one static image, while others offer a limited panoramic view. As you move through the world, the transitions between scenes will more often than not be a simple jump cut, but there are a few video transitions here and there as well. They are technically skippable by pressing the escape key, but this will more often than not also bring up the options menu in the process. So if you're really in a hurry, you can simply turn the video transitions off in said options menu.
Something that you can't turn off in said options menu, which I really wish you could, is the autosave feature. Now, 9 times out of 10, then autosave is a very welcome feature and can save your butt if you screw up majorly and forget to save manually. But in this game, you lose all mouse control while the game autosaves. The process only lasts for a few seconds, but it happens so damn often that it gets frustrating really quick.
And talking of frustration, let's move on to the puzzles, which every now and again will just up and decide, you know what, screw it, I don't feel like working right now, and will tell you you're wrong, despite the fact that I know, for damn certain, I did everything correctly, and in such cases you'll have to input the solution several times before the puzzle decides to come back from its smoke break and work properly. Thankfully, however, these instances were relatively scarce, and the rest of the time I was able to appreciate the puzzle design, which was excellent. For the most part, the puzzles will appear complex, but as long as you pay attention to your surroundings and take good notes, or good screenshots for that matter, everything you need to solve a puzzle is there for you. Although I did encounter one or two where I feel like part of the solution wasn't explained properly, and some that were just outright way too damn complicated for their own good. If things get too tough, however, you do have hints available in the easier difficulties.
So, in its execution overall, Kataif might miss the mark in a couple of places, but to me, the pros far outweigh the scant few cons. That, plus the presence of the aforementioned demo, I think makes the game well worth its $14 asking price. When I decided to do a Myst-like episode, I already had several games in mind that I wanted to cover, Quern being among them, but nonetheless I thought I'd get some additional opinions, and so I reached out to some friends on Twitter and Discord and various social medias and whatnot, and asked for some recommendations. One of my friends who goes by the name The Wanderer 1990 sent me a buttload of games to consider, and again, Quern was on the list. So here we are.
Always appreciated in any video game, Quern wastes no time in both putting you right into the action and grabbing your interest, and opens with you being teleported flat on your face into the mysterious land of Quern. Soon you find a letter from a Professor William Maythorne, who claims responsibility for trapping you here, and through more letters you find later, explains that Quern is literally timeless. There's no day or night, and you stop aging while in the realm, and he wants your help providing access to Quern from other worlds. As you explore the realm and solve the various puzzles, you'll eventually meet Gamana, who would much rather you didn't follow the professor's instructions and left Quern alone, thank you very much.
At the dawn of the Third Age, we were attacked by the shadows.
Hang on. Fairly sure I've heard that somewhere before.
It was the dawn of the Third Age of mankind.
In the year of the Shadow War.
Yeah, that's the one. Now, once you've met Gamana, and really even before then, the story becomes very clear-cut and predictable. It's not hard at all to tell who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, yet it's by no means boring. I was always invested with the story, with each new piece revealed to me, and on the whole I thought it was well done. With the exception of the endings. There's 2 of them, one good and one bad, and without giving too much away, neither one felt very satisfying to me. You can tell which is the good ending and which is the bad, but you don't get to see the consequences of your actions so much as you're just told what's going to happen. Some kind of further epilogue wouldn't have gone amiss.
At first glance, the realm of Quern is not the most pleasant place to look at. Almost everything's gray, and if something does have a color to it, it's more than likely muted. I suppose the in-story reason for that would be the aforementioned lack of a day-night cycle, which itself, I would imagine, was written into the story in order to avoid programming such a cycle, and if so, writing it into the story is a clever way to cover it up. But the more you explore the land, you begin to see there's still a subtle variety to the color scheme, and just enough contrast between the muted colors and shades of gray to prevent it being too uncomfortable to look at.
That said, the game struggled to maintain a consistent frame rate even with all the graphic settings turned low, and I was running it on a machine that exceeds the game's recommended specs. Hell, the frame rate even tanked during the end credits.
Despite Quern being a Myst-like game, it has a first-person shooter control scheme, which I think makes it all the more accommodating, allowing you to explore the land at your own pace. You can also run and even zoom in on things by clicking the mouse wheel. And if you're not sure what to do or what to interact with, you can hold down the left alternate key to highlight interactable objects. A good idea in theory, but it could have used a bit more tweaking. For one thing, the sparkles which appear to highlight hotspots sometimes don't match up with the objects they're meant to be highlighting, and the feature also continues to highlight objects that have already been used and serve no further purpose. Lastly, let's talk a bit about the puzzles, and I'm sort of torn as to how I feel about them. I do think they're mostly well designed, but a lot of them were needlessly complicated, with steps which could have been taken out without harming the overall puzzle, and one or two puzzles which I feel were just not that well explained at all.
But as an overall package, Quern, while being one of the more expensive games I've covered at $25, is still a very well put together game, and one which I have no problems whatsoever recommending. That same YouTuber that recommended Quern to me, among many others, also recommended this game, Rhem, claiming it to be the most Myst-like game he's ever played. And indeed, I've seen a couple of more modern first-person point-and-clicks who, in their marketing blurbs, compare themselves not just to Myst, but to Rhem as well. So from all accounts, it would seem like Rhem is the Myst-like among Myst-likes. After all, the game spawned 3 sequels, and most of the games have had special edition re-releases, so it must have done something right. Right?
Well, it's certainly got the look nailed down pat. Despite being released almost 10 years after Myst, Rhem's graphics and textures are nearly identical in quality. And weirdly, I can't decide if that's good or bad. The opening cutscene doesn't help matters either. It shows you entering the land of Rhem via some kind of rail car, presumably to show off the areas you'll be exploring later, but your only view comes from a tiny little window, made even tinier if you play the game in windowed mode, which you'll more than likely want to do for reasons I'll get into in a minute. Plus, the rail trip lasts for a minute and a half, during which you could do precisely nothing. Fine if you're brand new to the game, but if you're starting over and want to skip the cutscene, you're SOL.
When you start the game up, the first thing you'll see is this screen, giving you the option to play in full screen mode or windowed mode. Those choices are actually a little bit misleading though. Now, full screen is as it sounds. It allows you to play the game in full screen and the game looks something like this. But when you're playing in windowed mode, you're still playing in full screen mode, except now the game looks something like that. Now, either option should be fine if you've just got a single monitor, but if you're like me and you have a dual monitor setup, avoid full screen like the plague, as it somehow makes your computer think your second monitor is up here somewhere. And if you've got Windows open in the second monitor when that happens, it can be a son of a bitch to get them back to normal.
After arriving in Rhem, you begin to explore a bit, and soon you come across this dude who, in a not-so-brilliantly acted monologue, explains that his railcar crashed and he's been trapped here for an indeterminately long time, during which he hasn't been able to figure out how to work anything. And now that there's another railcar, he's shutting off, and because you had the audacity to show up now and not earlier, he's leaving you here to fend for yourself. Which is the dumbest reasoning I've ever heard, but whatever. Gotta get this game going somehow, I guess.
But to come to the decision that he couldn't figure anything out would mean that he would first have to find something to try to figure out. And personally, I find the fact that the guy found anything a frickin' miracle, as it is incredibly easy to get turned around in Rhem. The game's not so much Myst-like as it is maze-like, and I would say that a map would have been nice, but I've seen the maps in this game. Yeah, they don't help.
Let's talk puzzles. Or more accurately, let's talk valves. Valves are to this game as chess is to the seventh guest. In the few hours I spent with this game, I remember more puzzles having to do in one way or another with turning valves or with pipelines that were as maze-like as the world in which they reside. Now admittedly, the puzzles I found that didn't have to do with valves or pipes I thought were well done, but they felt few and far between. And when I'm already having to navigate a world that's way too damn twisty-turny for its own good, only to come upon a puzzle that's just as twisty-turny, I'm sorry, it's just too much.
Apparently the objective of the game is to find 4 pieces of a letter which will somehow give you the means to leave Rhem. The closest I came was finding this gizmo, which is presumably used to put the 4 pieces together. But after 4 hours of backtracking, going in circles, and generally just getting lost, I still didn't even find one piece, and I began to sympathize with the dude that steals your cart. To hell with Rhem. I just want out. Bitch, that's gonna leave a mark. Ow. That'll do it for this episode of QuickTime Event. Hope you enjoyed it. If there's a game you think I missed, then do be sure and let me know. Either here on YouTube or somewhere on my various social medias, links to which are down in the description. In the meantime, I invite you as always to comment, like, share, and subscribe when onegaishimasu. And thank you so very much for watching. Jikai mare. Sayonara.